IKAWA Pro, I've got, I think it's the V3, and I've had it for 3 years now. It's one of the first purchases I made for the roastery before I really knew much about owning a roastery. I kind of thought that as a roaster you need to be able to roast samples, understand coffees and stuff like that. Probably in hindsight a little bit, I bought it a bit early, but I still use it for all my samples, and actually it gives me that little bit of flexibility where I know exactly every sample that I do is roasted the same compared to, whereas if I was getting roasted samples from suppliers and things like that, they might roast them all differently and things like that. So it kind of gives me peace of mind from there. Potentially I don't utilise it as much as I really should or could. At some point, maybe next year, I need to start playing with, you know, changing phases, and can I roast quicker, slower? How do I change it, roasting quicker, slower? The coffees that come out of it really work for me in terms of sample roasting and understanding the coffees that I'm buying. So at the moment, I just like to preheat the roaster before I start. So before I do the first batch, you know, you do that with a normal roaster. You know, this sits around for weeks at a time, so I just want to kind of get a bit of residual heat in it before I do a first roast. Kind of gives me time to weigh out my first kind of sample that I'm going to put in. I always do 50 grams. And I keep all my samples in little tubs. Usually I've got way too many samples. And it also actually shows the longevity of coffee sometimes, because sometimes I'll just pick samples up from here that are like months old, and I'll be like, I'm just gonna make a coffee of that because I remember it was good, and then go, still good, yeah. Like that whole fallacy that, you know, needs to be drunk the day before it was roasted kind of stuff, you know, you can debunk a little bit with, you know, leaving coffee sitting around in pots in a roastery. I've gone through the original IKAWA library that was in there with various different people's stuff on it, kind of found a profile that seems to work, and you know, I've doctored it a little bit, you know, like I think I've lengthened it a little bit, kind of added a bit more temperature into it, and then that gives me, if coffees don't go into first crack till a bit later, it means that it doesn't just suddenly shut off, so it just gives me a bit more scope for running development if I want. Yeah, and then like if I've got, sometimes if I'm just roasting coffees, like new coffees, and I don't necessarily just want to do a sample roast on them, I'll like find something that matches a bit more. So sometimes I chop and change, but generally if I'm doing sample roasting, I try and keep it. Or if I've got enough sample, I'll do one as a sample roast and one from how someone else has decided that they should roast that coffee and stuff like that. Yeah, yeah. I've never had any problems. So I've had it a few weeks and it stopped heating, but actually I got in touch with IKAWA, they took it back, kind of fixed it pretty quickly and got it back to me. So yeah, I've never really had any problems in that terms. I love the case, but then there's a geeky engineering case, right? At no point am I ever taking it on a flight, but I know I can. So I usually take it to about 20% development, just so then I know it's like the sort of similar chunk past first crack of all of them. But yeah, it's definitely something I want to look at is how do I change the phases within this? How do I make the drying a bit quicker or slower to then work out how that changes the cut, so then I could change the way I roast, yeah. I think it just depends what you want it for. I think if you wanted to try and convert it through to a bigger roast, you're gonna struggle, but then, you know, you're gonna struggle with whatever you use to sample roast, because roasters, you know, going up in scale doesn't necessarily, you know, can't just go, it worked at 50 grams, so now I'm going to do 6 kilos, and it's going to react exactly the same in a completely different roaster. Yeah, it works for what I want it for at the moment, for sure.